can't we use the Zoom, the normal Tuesday call?
Well, I didn't choose that just because I didn't want to have clashes if there are other meetings that were on that time that we're not aware of, just because it's an Eclipse-wide Zoom account.
So I thought I'm not aware anybody else except MicroProfile using. I thought this is the kind of, we have a tentative Tuesday slot anyway.
I mean, either way, we can get the video published. So.
Okay, so welcome everyone to Architecture Call for MicroProfile. I've added a link to the notes in the chat. Please add your name to the list there. So a lot of these things have been sitting around for a while, and I guess for a catch up for those that may not be aware, all the issues in the Eclipse/MicroProfile GitHub repository that are marked with a label of architecture board, basically they're things that we go through in this meeting and try and close out within a reasonable amount of time, so that things don't get delayed and held up. Now, there's obviously quite a backlog of things in there because we haven't really resolved a lot of stuff of late. And plus there's other things that have come up in the meantime. So I've kind of thrown a bit of an agenda there. Some of those are things that have been going on for a while. Some of them might just be a case of doing a quick review and saying, yes, this is resolved. Other things might require more in-depth discussion, but we'll see how far we get through this. So the first thing I had on the list there was the MP platform specification, which John sent around, what, 6-7 weeks ago now, John, something like that?
Oh, at least. It was before the Christmas break, I think.
Okay. Now, I had a read of this a couple of weeks ago, and there wasn't anything that jumped out as I see a problem with that.
I do have a couple comments. The first comment is, when I first created this, I was jotting down a bunch of things. I think there's two concerns in there. One is platform definition, another one is a release process. And so those should be split into separate documents. So that's one FYI. The other FYI is that I'm kind of pausing on that because I want to finish off the growing pains discussion, because I think that's going to, and I actually hope to get to that today, and continue that conversation in the Google group today, because I think that's going to impact how we define the platform.
Okay. So are you saying for now we should put any discussion on that platform on hold? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is I added a comment, John, on the doc. I think it's time for us to standardize it's on the standard, and one like implementation say past MicroProfile 2.2 or 2.1. I think we should ask for evidence, at least like the link to the TCK run and etc., the logs and etc. I think we need to make it more formal. So I added a comment on your section about spec compliance.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll look to incorporate that. I think that's good feedback.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the next one I had on the list was actually the MP size, which I think is the growing pains discussion, John. So are you saying you'd rather not talk about that right now and you'd do more in the forum first, or?
I think we can have that discussion here, actually,
okay.
And it could float into the Google group if we wanted to as well. With the output of this discussion, maybe it might be a good starting point or continuation point in the community.
Yeah, we can have a bit of a discussion now about the points you've raised, and then maybe we can take that as a summary back to the group as to what this group thought, and then go from there. So obviously it's quite a long thread, the growing pains one. I don't know if everyone's up to speed with what's in there. Does anyone have any comments or thoughts off the bat?
So
I'll
I
summarize
just
it briefly if you want.
yeah, do that. Thank you. So I read all them all. I'm still fresh, I think.
Yeah, the 30-second summary is that there's a couple of issues as we grow MicroProfile. Today it's like 9 specs, 8 homegrown specs and 1 homegrown spec that's not included in the platform. So that's 9 homegrown specs. Tack on the list that we're going to be adding this year and probably next year. It's going to be a lot more. So two things. One is perception. Hey, MicroProfile is big and heavy. Again, it doesn't mean everybody has to. Well, anyway, one perception it's big and heavy. Another one is it's feature rich. Those are kind of different ways of looking at the same thing. The other one is it's going to be more and more difficult to attract new implementations because now if you got 13 or 14 or 15 specs, it raises the bar for what it takes for us to attract new implementations of MicroProfile. So that at a high level is kind of the concern. And if you read through this thread, basically we start discussing things like, well, do we need to have within MicroProfile the concept of profiles, right, or something like that, ways to organize specs to lower the bar in terms of adopting new implementations and maybe simplify the message to the market about, hey, this isn't necessarily this Java EE all over again. All right, so that's the summary.
Actually, it's a very good discussion. I think it is a real problem. Last week I was at a conference. Actually, I had someone is kind of monitor this thread closely, and he also used MicroProfile for his own product and etc. And his feedback, asked for his input and etc. His feedback is the current like a MicroProfile umbrella stack is complete enough. We could call it core. This is kind of all the basic blocks are there, and which is why inspired me to comment on this thread. So basically, we could box it up to say this is core stack, and then we could add some addendum, maybe it's a kind of reactive stack. So basically, a few minutes ago, I replied to Ken's email regarding the other stacks. So if we add like a reactive pointers stack, we will have the reactive stream operators, reactive messaging, maybe have a concurrency or is called context propagation or and etc. It's all to do with the reactive aspect. Maybe that can sit on top of the core, however is it include the core. So basically it's kind of that's for the reactive programming model, etc. It's the third category is optional. Basically is we have not agreed on whether everyone is happy with the spec and etc. Make it optional. So anyway, that's my thought. Maybe the way we need to get more people to weigh in and discuss how best to proceed with this. I do think if we have kind of keep growing, it's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I think there's this balancing act of how we group or not group these specs together, right? Things that go beyond the core. So I think a lot of people like the idea of core plus other things surrounding it. Part of the problem that I'm worried about is if we find that some implementations choose some specs and some other implementations choose other specs, then I, as a developer, then all of a sudden have to find, if I want to switch, I have to find somebody else that has the same selection of APIs if I want to choose a different implementation, right? It breaks the portability story. And so I
Yeah,
guess one question that might be good in the architecture call is like, is portability still a core concern? Or are we just going to become a
yeah,
palette of specs?
yeah. So I did bring up the portability. I think we should keep the optional as few as possible to maintain the portability. Again, I think it's for MicroProfile, we have two good selling points. One is the interoperability, the other one is the portability. If we break that, I feel like we don't have any other strong point when we come to compete with somebody else.
Like, one thing I was thinking about is, okay, we keep the core, and then we begin adding some standalone specs. And once we think we have the right, enough specs to create a new grouping, we can maybe create another grouping. So there might be MicroProfile core, MicroProfile reactive, MicroProfile big data. I'm just throwing things out, right? MicroProfile something else.
Yeah, MicroProfile data
That's
access.
yeah. So there might be a way to do that. What that means temporarily, right, is that we're going to have a lot of individual standalone specs until we have some grouping mechanism, right, where we have enough specs where it makes sense to have a grouping mechanism.
Right, but I think we can already start working on the MicroProfile reactive. Like a MicroProfile reactive, we have like at least 3 candidates. We have reactive streams operators and reactive messaging, and also context propagation. And I do agree, like for the maybe data access, we will make it a standalone if we do go ahead with R2DBC, and then make it standalone if we have other, maybe it's better to group with GraphQL. So all the kind of data access related stuff.
So yeah, so I think my problem right now is that there's lots of different options, and it's trying to, excuse me, figure out a good balance that doesn't lead us too far down one direction at the expense of others. If that makes sense. So, for example, I certainly don't think we want a single platform or thing with 30 specs in it, because then we're Java EE again and there's no point in having MicroProfile. Conversely, we don't want to break things up so much that we have like 5 or 10 different stacks in MicroProfile, because then it's going to be a case of we're not going to have the portability because not all vendors are going to implement all stacks. And then there's going to be well, shoot, when do I use this stack versus this stack? And it's just going to cause a whole lot more world of hurt. But in addition to that, there are going to be some specs that will always be kind of on the outside. And not wanting to pick on you, Martin, but LRA, I could see being something that is useful but niche enough that most vendors are going to say, I don't want that in my regular stack. It's if someone wants to pull in an LRA implementation to do that for their app, then they can, but I'm not going to have it in my MicroProfile stack. So I'm not sure where that really leaves us in terms of options. Like, one thing I've been toying around is to whether we need to revisit the core itself, both from a how does this work with reactive perspective? Because I know from discussions I've had with Clement, basically he's of the mindset, and I would agree because he knows much better than I do, that anything reactive needs to be at like the lowermost level, because you can build blocking stuff onto reactive, but you can never build reactive onto blocking. So having what we have in core now as the core for everything would pose problems for doing anything reactive on top of that. Now, somewhat separate to that is I've had the idea of, well, maybe some stuff that's in core today doesn't really need to be in core today. And I've been pondering whether we need to break up and almost create stacks within reason, kind of based on use cases. So for example, if you're developing a microservice that does stuff only within itself, then you don't need fault tolerance, you don't need REST client, you don't need these things that deal with talking with distributed services. So it's kind of like an isolated thing. But then if you take it to the next level and say you are doing distributed stuff and you're talking to external services, then yes, fault tolerance, REST client, all these other things come into play. So it's almost, right now I'm wondering whether there's kind of like a couple of key use cases we can define as this is a stack for this use case. But granted, I don't know where that leaves us with reactive in trying to be something that isn't just completely separate. So that's what I've been thinking about.
Yeah. There's an interesting thing that a couple of people independently have said to me about fault tolerance if you're running in a mesh, to do with the separation of concerns, where you might be left with a fallback, but then people are saying, well, that's a kind of constrained try-catch, really. But it's the metrics that add the value. But if you're getting that from the proxies as well, there's almost like a sweet spot for fault tolerance, which is, okay, it's not single service, but if you were running really at scale, maybe it's not the concern of something that's in the application annotations. I think that's a very interesting aspect. And I think there was another thing that came up for me. We're talking about treating a spec as a kind of non-splittable entity, but there's two cases where that hasn't held. And one is the Helidon referencing the config spec in the environment where they didn't have CDI. They talked about subsetting it because config came out first, and we sort of did the API first and then the CDI stuff on top. And the second example, of course, is CDI itself, because Quarkus, CDI is part of MicroProfile, and Quarkus, no one's really mentioned the kind of it does CDI, but it's a subset of CDI. So there is that other aspect of are all our specs monotonic, and are they going to be in the future if we move more kind of functional on and maybe more into a compiled environment where it's more ARC based rather than JEE CDI? Right,
and it's interesting you bring that up, because that's something that Mark Little mentioned to me when there was the discussion going on about renaming MicroProfile concurrency to MicroProfile context propagation. In his view, it was a case of context propagation is what it does today. That's what it should be named. And if we want to add concurrency stuff later, we should create an entirely new spec to do concurrency stuff when we're going to do concurrency stuff. So I think his view was that we could have a plethora of specs that do like a very small niche kind of thing. Now I know that kind of goes against the whole bloat side of things, but I guess if it's easier, and maybe getting back to your point, that brings up the idea of, well, maybe fault tolerance should be split into two, in that like there's just the minimal set, which is the fallback because you need that in all environments. And then in addition, there's all the circuit breaker retry kind of stuff that it's like if you're not in a mesh environment, then you can add all these extra bits, but they're not there and ignored if you're not in a mesh, if you're in a mesh environment. Yeah, I think I said that right.
Are we overthinking this? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Finally. Oh, fine. Oh, this is great. Okay, so Gordon talked about something that's super important, and so did Candy and Mark Little. I think we're overthinking this. MicroProfile, when we think about, let's do an example of reactive, and what we have heard, many of us have heard this, and we continue to hear this. Why would we add MicroProfile? Why would MicroProfile adopt reactive as a core and become a reactive application, right? So when we decided to have different specs for MicroProfile. I call them components, not specs, components. We said they could be used at will without being a requirement. We should go back into containment and say, what are the requirements, core requirements? Currently, we have not even 8. I don't believe that, you see, we need to keep them separate. This is part of the growing pains, and what I believe that John is right. We need to go back to the basics and use that thread, because should we decide to do anything big deal in this call, we will have issues. We need to minimize. We need to make MicroProfile more adaptable. John is correct. Currently, MicroProfile is becoming too large and too complex. We need to increase adaptability. That means it's not about dropping stuff. It's about simplifying how we use them and keep them separate. So we need to be very, very careful to say, to run MicroProfile, you must have X, because that will dilute the simplicity of what and why MicroProfile exists, right?
If I may just add to that, like from a developer perspective, when I'm starting to write my microservice, I don't really want to think about stacks or anything else above one particular specification that I am going to use right now. And this is all that I want to include.
Yeah, so you're talking about, are you talking about adapting the stuff?
And this is exactly my concern, because if we make like too many specifications optional, it will discourage developers to actually use them, because you never know if you want to switch one day and you cannot suddenly.
But you see,
Yeah,
we have not, let me just clarify this, Martin, and sorry, Emily. I think we have the issue that we have not documented the why to use a different component. What are the uses? Be very specific. Can we do that in 2 sentences so that we know if you want to build X because this is your goal, use this component, right? Like we don't have case studies at the moment. We you know, part of the growing pains is that when someone joins and they want to be, they are coders, they run it. We have the started now. But before that, they wouldn't know what each company did without doing research, without, you know, playing stuff. And I'm saying we need to simplify this. And that means if I want a steak, I want pepper and salt, 2 things, right? And garlic. But this is me. Someone else might just want salt, right? If we need to, we will never be able to make everyone happy, but us having the different flavors by choice, giving the perspective that they know exactly what they're getting because of what they want to do. Do you see what I mean? I want to do X, and to do that, I need to grab these components.
If I'm understanding correctly, what you're saying is having a minimal core and then everything optional?
Yes.
But
Well,
I think
I
it's okay. I agree with too many options. So,
you know,
as I said earlier, if we have optionals, and then is effectively we defeated our goal, or are we still portability? Are we still supporting portability? So if it's we make 1 optional, it's like 5 optionals, and then okay, Open Liberty choose maybe implement 3, maybe the Quarkus only implement 1, and then you cannot move around. Your application is basically still stuck. And the other thing that I do agree, I think what Martin has brought in, we at the end of the day, growing pain is a growing pain. However, whatever we do, we need to make sure the developers' life a lot easier. So so that's why I think we still need to stay with this bucket idea. So basically, if you are doing reactive, maybe you use reactive kind of bucket. If you are not doing reactive, maybe you just use a core. So I think it's, however, the bucket is not optional. They are still mandatory. It's only like very, very few stacks we cannot agree on within ourselves whether it's in a position to be put into any bucket. For example, we don't agree with each other about implementation or whether it's kind of good enough. or is kind of important enough to be added to any bucket.
You know, like we should be ruthless, and I believe that we should go back into the core, like Ken said, go back into the core, and we should add this to the topic of the next agenda for the next month, because I don't think one call will suffice, but we should make it the whole concept of that call next week and say, go back to the core and start thinking and be ruthless about it. I am detached to stuff because we can adjust, we can modify, we can drop, and then adjust again. But we need to be better at being ruthless. We are being too nice. And this is why we're having
but remember, Amelia, remember, being ruthless, don't destroy ourselves. And
no, correct.
We need to make sure we are doing a good job for our end user. We should not break them. And
correct.
We should build a better life for them. It's not being ruthless, like doing anything as we wish. I think backward compatibility is still top on the agenda. So I disagree. Yes. We break everything up and rebuild. I think we destroy ourselves.
No, you are rewarding you are rewarding. I'm not saying redo things. I am saying about simplifying stuff. We have not. If we were to rank the 4 most valuable components, what would they be? Why? You know, can we go in this room and be? What are the 4 that cannot be dropped? Do we have those names right now? I don't think we do. Right? So what I'm saying is,
I think
we need to grade them.
Forward.
Go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead. This is good because.
So I think to move forward, we should resolve the problem without breaking the current customers. We do have customers, so I disagree with break up a stack, and then it's kind of doing something or split into pieces, and then it's kind of rejiggle them. So I am leaning towards, okay, we have the current bucket. Yes, we have these 12 stacks, and then we need to come up with a plan without even impacting the end users. How can we move forward?
Okay, so let me throw someone here on that. Anton is here. He's one of the people behind the CDI. CDI is pretty much responsible for the fuel put a few years ago into Java EE, correct? So Anton, tell us what you think. You're too quiet, and I know that if I wanted to know something, I want to know from you because you are core to Java EE, like what you created. So tell us.
So now a few questions. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Honestly,
maybe we should get Bob Lee on the call.
Why?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So CDI, I think CDI will stay part of Jakarta EE, Java EE, and is part of MicroProfile. And we have to think about having a more modular CGI approach, I think, in the future. We had a previous discussion about that, providing a kind of CGI light or stuff like that. Now, regarding the context propagation and such feature, everything is open here. So we could imagine bring those features in CDI or keep them outside. We have to choose. In fact, today we are how to say, we have a path to choose between MicroProfile, between Jakarta EE, between having a big CDI specification with all those features and adding new features. And to be honest, I'm thinking about relaunching discussion in the CDI expert group to explore those leads, but I cannot say by myself what we should do, what we must do. I don't know if it is an answer. Yeah.
Can I chip in? In a way, at my core, I'm an engineer. I think there will always be pressure to create new specs if being in a spec group is very good for someone's career. But we should follow the data. We should follow the users. So have we got a mechanism, lean startup style? We've created more than an MVP, but what is the data on what our people are using? Because we should be driven by the facts of what customers are using and some sort of telemetry, not the strength of character and people's opinions.
Yes. So Gordon, you're saying we should create a survey and run it through that.
Yeah.
So not only that, but what I'm saying is creating new features, though it's the sexy thing for coders. I think we're creating too many and it's becoming bothersome as we see it. I think we should refine what we have and make it better because code can be made better. I think the amount of debt we have created in MicroProfile is bothersome and is seen right now. And Gordon, you're correct. Anton, as the lead of CGI, he could not even sell MicroProfile to the community because it's too messy and there is too much debt. What I'm asking is for us to start being sexy and be much more efficient. We can do so many things. And they could lead to betterment. But there is more value into doing the right things. MicroProfile is not doing the right things at the moment. The coders, everyone is keeping busy, yet no one is checking and saying it's not the same to keep yourself busy 24/7 as creating something, doing the right things. The two things are not the same. So I'm saying, can we do the right things? And that means minimize it. We could even put so many of the same components can be put into one. We can do this. We can just cut massive debt. And Gordon, I believe that we should run a survey, like while we go through growing pains in town. What are the 4 or 5 components that are mostly used today? How? Question. We'll take you 30 seconds. Can we do this?
Okay, Amelia. So why shouldn't we create a survey on the growing pain to ask end users?
No.
To ask end users what they think.
No. We're talking about what I'm talking. My suggestion is to create a survey to be run 24/7 throughout the year for the users.
I'm having too much jitter. Sometimes I'm getting big gaps in what I hear.
So.
Hold on.
Yeah, Anton, did you?
Yes.
Maybe you
hear me now.
Rejoin.
Can everyone mute themselves? I hear so much noise. Okay, can you hear me now? There is no noise.
Yep.
Okay, this is what I'm saying. I'm saying the survey can be run not for the coders, but users 24/7. This is something that we can do better to proactively gather information from the users on what they are using, how are they using it, something that will take 30 seconds. And we can do this as a part of the improvement while we clean stuff. What I'm saying is, look, Anton said, as a CDI, we need to decide how we're going to use it. So adaptability, we need to fix this. I'm saying let's simplify, let's start cutting debt, and let's start trying to be sexy. Our culture needs to be socially responsible. That means it's not the shiny objects of creating new things. How do we deal with this to make sure that the code that is written becomes better instead of creating so many new features, right? When something is created, it needs to be done in a manner that follow the specs on super value, right? So let's go back to the core and let's figure out how we do this. John, you're on mute.
I got two different mute buttons and they're not in sync. Sorry. So I don't think we've been creating features just for the sake of creating features. I think various teams have recognized, among our respective customer bases, things that our customers want to do, and so we've kind of, we've created specs around them. Now, I really do like the idea of, maybe finding a survey or something like that. Now that MicroProfile is much more mature around where people want us to focus. Individually, I think we'll also have to address what our customer bases want. But being more data driven, as Gordon mentioned, I think is a good idea. Maybe it's not a survey. Maybe there's other ways we can gather data. We just have to decide what that is. And by the way, Ken, I know you run this meeting, and we've been on this topic for quite a while. I don't know if there's other things that you wanted to tackle as well.
Well, there are, but this always happens with these calls, so it's fine. And this is an important topic to maybe spend a few more minutes on. I guess from my perspective, I think maybe it's beneficial to have two surveys. One is like, what is your most used, like your preference or ordering of most used MicroProfile specs that exist now, so we can get a view on what people use more, what they have a preference for, because we may find that we have a spec or two here or there that's technically in the platform that people don't really use or don't find beneficial. And then separate to that, maybe it's worth having one around like future work and ideas and things like that. But I would also say that
I apologize for interrupting, Ken. Hey, Antoine, can you go on mute? I think that background noise is coming from your mic.
Yeah, and thanks, John. I was just going to say that I think, although I appreciate that we have existing customers and we don't necessarily want to break them for no reason, we can't not break things. Otherwise, we're going to end up in the same situation of Java EE, where things just keep getting added and added and added, and nothing is ever taken away.
Yes.
We need to be prepared to say, you know what, we put this in, we thought it was a good idea. Turns out the users don't really use it, or there's not enough of an interest, so we're taking it out again. If we can't do that, then we're basically messed up.
So Ken, you just touched the needle. MicroProfile is meant to be supported by the partners, right? And when a client comes and signs the SSA, the client says they will be supported until X, but it's the vendor that chooses how long to support certain features because it will add more debt. The partner cannot do it all by itself because we need contributors and we need adaptability. I am saying that when I think about our clients and those ones using MicroProfile, we are starting to notice what they are using it for. Usually, like it will be like in the finance area, in the health insurance, there are hospitals. What are the most efficient components being used and how, right? So we're gathering the data. We even submitted a session for Code One as a case study with one of our clients to make sure that if that we can bring a case study to that conference, right? We're starting to think about this. As a vendor, I am thinking what we have today is too much debt if it were to be supported just by drivers and added the features, right? Like you correct bugs. And if it was to be not contributors, but just the drivers, it would be over the top and we wouldn't be able to handle MicroProfile. So then that means that we will have to drop MicroProfile. I am saying that when I think about ruthless, I am not only thinking about being a MicroProfile, just a contributor, but also being an employer, an employee, and the benefits. We are too focused on being a coder, and we're not thinking about all these different aspects. Growing pains means we have to think and see beyond ourselves, right? We need to not only think as about companies, as a committers, as a coders, but also all of it. Have we thought enough? We haven't. So the service, what I can do is I can follow one step and say, I will create a Google Doc and I will create an issue. I will add all of you into that issue and we can work it in the open. And I imagine we can send even, Ken, if you can send the minutes to the forum, that will include the issue that I will create and we will do it effortlessly, creating the service. Because case studies are super important. We need to be, I just cannot say enough. Let's stop adding debt. Let's simplify. And let's find those components. Let's find those components that are aligned, doing familiar things. We can put them together, make them stronger, cut debts. That is what I mean by simplifying. I'm not saying like just breaking. I'm just saying make it easier for not only us to maintain, but for the users to adapt, you know?
Yeah,
No,
I agree. Making it simpler is really good thing to do, and like being user friendly. So one thing I want to bring up, we keep on like trying to gather like as adoptions. How can we come up with a more efficient way to collect which customers are using MicroProfile for production? I just worry about like okay, the customer don't want to share their data with us, or like how can we make sure they are willing to like collaborate with us, like we are trying to like solve their problems. We're not trying to ask them to like do something and etc. We are reaching out and to help them more. So what's a more efficient way trying to get some more people to willing to collaborate with us and put their details on the like adoption wiki?
Okay, so on this, I brought Cumulus, Matt from Cumulus, and he has, currently they have many clients using MicroProfile, and we can pull him into this. He's ready to write case studies. He has so much information on how his clients are using MicroProfile, what is being used the most.
Yeah, we need that.
Okay, so
sorry to interrupt, guys, but this isn't really an architecture topic, so I'd say it's definitely worth discussing, but we need to bring it up at the main call versus this group. So Amelia, if you could take the action on the surveys, that would be great, and I'll forward around the minutes after the meeting. And I guess John, if you want to take some of the ideas we've outlined here and feed them back into the Growing Pains thread, then we can continue the discussion there until the next meeting. I think we've probably discussed that enough for now. So moving on, the next one I had here was an issue in MicroProfile around OSGI. Now, I think this has been resolved, but I'm far from an OSGI expert, so I don't know. But it's a pretty old issue, and it doesn't look like much has happened for a while. So I wanted to get everyone's thoughts as to whether this is something we can close as being done or whether there's still work required.
I think we can go ahead to close it.
Okay. I will do that and add a note that we think it's done, and if not, then please reopen.
Yeah. So is a kind of no like conclusion has been reached, and so that's why.
Well, I know a lot of changes were put in for OSGI. I thought that's what all this was about, was just.
No, this is something further. So basically, this is someone want to make make a MicroProfile to directly support something like other requirement. For example, let me give you an example. Like take a CDI, for example. MicroProfile, most specs require CDI. And then in OSGI, there's one spec directly come up to declare CDI as a kind of as a kind of component, right? As a component. And then he come up with the idea, okay, maybe MicroProfile should require that capability, need to require that capability. However, that capability is not provided by probably not provided by any application servers. For example, most application servers do not provide that. It's not enforced by Java EE. So that's why I don't think this is something MicroProfile should directly declare requirement, which is not part of the Java EE, but is something provided by OSGI.
Okay, so it's more we're going to close it because we won't do it kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, no problem. The next one on the list is around default interface methods. It's one Andro raised last year. Basically, the issue is, should we have MicroProfile APIs with default interface methods on them? I think the concern was that having default methods on the interface means that you're essentially providing a part implementation in the API and you're kind of crossing the boundaries. I'm kind of on the fence on this one. I can see benefits in terms of providing common stuff, but I think one of the issues raised was around loading implementations through service loaders, I think. I don't know if anyone has any specific or more detailed understanding of the problem or a particular view.
So my take on this default implementation, like for the default interface method, is a case by case. I think is for MP APIs. Obviously, when we define APIs, if some method, can be implemented by the default, or not that essential enough, you have to provide the implementation. Yes, that's fine to have a default. However, for a lot of the method, we shouldn't provide the default, and then maybe in some method with no way to provide the default. So I don't think we should enforce, okay, all the APIs should have this default implementation. That's my take. Yeah, basically, I'm not sure this is something we should enforce.
So you think it's more a case of spec by spec, they decide whether they want to have default methods on an interface or not?
Yeah, exactly. Like a config, we have some default implementation. That's because they're more suitable to have some default. Only a handful. So.
There's quite a bit of useful. Yeah, there's quite a bit of useful implementation that came from James Roper in the MicroProfile reactive streams operators. But I think doing it as part of the interface, all that he'd had, he was very good at taking on board the fact that he made that code replaceable. So there's a factory and an engine, and there's no kind of default engine implementation, but he provides a kind of default factory implementation, but it's completely replaceable. So I think we have shipped some, code in the specs, but it's probably not the best design. If we can avoid putting it as part of the interface, that's a good thing.
Yeah, the other thing is the more code we put in the API, there's a kind of, if the buggy code, and then we have more issue to fix. It's a more, I think it's a bigger possibility to get it wrong. The more line code, the bigger possibility to have more bugs.
So from a MP-wide perspective, would we want to take the stance of something like it's recommended not to put default methods on interfaces, but the final decision is up to each spec as to whether they want to deal with the maintenance of fixing issues in a default method?
I think this is a case by case. We shouldn't enforce them to do something. If it's we not encourage default probably, but if it makes more sense to have the default, yeah, they can go ahead to define the default. I can see default is if later you add a method on the new version of spec, however you don't want to implementation may not, it's kind of most people will implement it this way. Okay, you provide a default, so the implementation needs to have a massive job to do.
And this way, it's beneficial to add no discipline. Like, this is a different topic. Like, when there is no direction, how much is the value on that? Like, if we leave it so open-ended, what are the cons?
Unfortunately, I think it's a case-by-case basis. For some things, it's like we've got no issues with specs doing different things. but in some situations, like TCK, for example, we want all specs to be consistent about how they're doing TCKs and what they're using for the TCK and things like that. So, but there's probably a lot of stuff where we can be like, the specs can do whatever they want. And there's other stuff where it's like, you know what, we want to be consistent across everyone. I'm not sure where this one falls in that, as to whether it's we need to enforce something or we just let specs do whatever they want. I don't have a preference.
I prefer that spec to have freedom to control because they know the best.
Okay. I'm fine with that.
And for what it's worth, CGI 2 has a default interface method, defined different interface method in some interfaces.
Yeah.
So the rule is the rule has already been broken.
I love it. You see, now we get to study. So then you were saying that this has been said before, that we will let the contributors manage their own way of, we have 3 releases a year, 3 or 4, 3 releases a year. And then they can is this related to that? I'm getting confused here. We're like too circular at the moment, so it's not clear what we're talking about anymore. If we're talking about the releases and when stuff can be broken or how they can run the TCK, I think those 2 things are super different. Not everyone knows how to run the TCK. I don't even think we have been awesome at being transparent with TCK and MicroProfile, have we?
No, I'm just confused what you're talking about, Amelia. Are you still talking about like a decision as to across groups as to whether it's something we need to decide on or just let the groups do?
Yes, this is related to.
Okay, yes. So when I brought up TCK, I was not really talking about the running of them, more how they're implemented, like in terms of whether it's JUnit or TestNG, and having like common patterns for how the TCKs are done and stuff like that. I don't think we mandate any of that right now, which is one of the other issues that's on the agenda, which we won't get to.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I was referring to, if that clears things up.
I think they all kind of use a sort of standard pattern, but I think something that might pop up is test containers, but no one's sort of done it yet. But I wouldn't be surprised if that comes up in the near future.
Yes, like testing, right? Like the
actual thing called test containers with a kind of diagonal cube as its icon.
Okay,
Yep.
yeah, that's different. Do you know, like TCK is free? We have not even done a big deal about this. The TCK is going to be free. It's being written, as many of you know, and we should maybe simplifying MicroProfile means to focus on the TCK, because that thing is hard. How many lines of code do we have in MicroProfile by component? Like in total, how many lines of code? And how many, the TCK needs to be run, and like it has like close to 20,000 lines of code or something like this. So it's just so complex. I think even this call, we should focus it on the TCK next time and see MicroProfile and the components running TCK. Maybe that will make us focus on testing. And that will save us so much time and travel and saying, if it cannot be passed, you're not valuable. And then we started to decompress. Maybe that is the solution we need to bring on board, right? Testing.
I think, Amelia, I think we are not talking about TCK and etc. Maybe you should raise Google discussion on the testing related. I think we do need to a serious look at the testing related, like in MicroProfile, how to simplify the testing. However, I think at the moment we are talking about default methods.
Mm-hmm. But that is too small for this call. We need to think larger. That is my philosophy. My philosophy is our job, the school's job, is not to focus on the little things, but in the broader area. And we're talking about TCK. Let's think bigger. And this is my feedback. You can all disagree, and I will ask why, how, and we can convince each other, but it's not about convincing. The most valuable thing that we have come up out of the Java EE and the current Java industry is the TCK, and it's freedom. You don't have to pay $100,000 to $200,000 for it.
But I think, Amelia, you're drifting into sort of community hangout topics in a way, because growing the community and that sort of stuff, isn't that the topic subjects of the other call, whereas this is more kind of to do with architecture?
Yeah, usually.
Yeah, so Amelia, I think I think it's best for you to bring it up maybe in the Google discussion to have to discuss further if there's a kind of architecture related, maybe bring up back here.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So sounds good. I will do that. I will add it to the agenda.
Yeah,
TCK.
Yeah, but we do need to look at TCK to make it better. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so given the time, there's only a few minutes left. I've moved some of the remaining agenda items until next time. And I know, Emily, you'd raised the one around backwards incompatibility. We don't obviously really have a lot of time to talk about that.
Yeah, no. So we can discuss. However, I do want to say a couple of things, and then we can carry on discussion maybe next time. So I think now is a good timing to agree on the guideline of the breaking changes, how to communicate the breaking changes to the community. I know it's at least 3 specs trying to at the moment are introducing breaking changes. We need to kind of standardize the procedure, like how best to communicate the breaker changes. What kind of, if someone get these breaker changes, what can they do to recover from it? Basically, they got their code is not compiled and etc. And then there should be some means for them to fix them themselves. So it's along similar line, in the past we have this release note. So we need to I suggest in the spec with the breaker changes, there should be a chapter. So kind of detail the breaker changes and for each breaker changes and come up with action. So it's how the end user can fix migrate from the older version to this new version. So basically, that's however, we need to make it consistent between the specs.
Well, I don't think that's...
Make it to think.
Yeah, I don't think that's unreasonable. I would even go further and to say that any specification that's doing a breaking change for a major platform release should probably plan to write some kind of blog about how to migrate from the old to the new, so that it can be a bit more publicized than just release notes, because they can be a bit buried and hard to find. But I would suggest, Emily, maybe raising a Google group on the thread so we can get some wider discussion and then circle back at the next meeting.
Okay, I create the issue. I will bring up on the Google discussion. Maybe people have different views and they have good ideas. Okay, I think that's summed up, right?
So one thing, I have created the issue and I added a link to the drive, MicroProfile drive, so that I only have 2 questions and the survey. We are talking about the service, but I'm saying the first one that when I think about what we need to gather is going there and I said list the components that are currently available and then industry. What industry is using it? That is the 2 questions. It will take 30 seconds. If all of you are added to the issue, please go in there and just say what other question. I think we should keep it simple. And then this, as soon as we're done, we can present it on next community call, say this is what we're going to have and just move forward, but definitely help. I'm super minimal on those services. So I need your help, guys. But this was awesome. I'm glad I joined. So, I had told the people to join, but they dropped at the last minute due to troubles. So I joined.
Amelia, your question about not just focusing on the developers, do you have somewhere where we could create other personas? The only people that I can think of are a DevOps person, running the metrics, maybe in fault tolerance or metrics, and perhaps, maybe someone running a TCK, a junior dev having to run a TCK. But I'd have to see those personas and sort of think, well, what tasks do they have to be able to do some engineering on helping people other than people like me.
Yes, so we're talking about two services. The first one that I'm focusing right now is the general that will be run in the MicroProfile website. And but you're correct. We have to move to, and I'm not going to make this call even longer, but I'm going to reach out to him and say, for him to start giving us that data.